What's happening? Catechism 23. Question: why must the Redeemer be truly God? That because of his divine nature, his obedience and suffering would be perfect and effective. Perfect and effective. Talk about both of those. And also that we would be able to bear that he would be able to bear the righteous anger of God against sin and yet overcome death. Super grateful for these catechisms. The incarnation is something that I've known theologically. I've had a hard time the last few weeks getting it on the ground, and so I've had to kind of process through some of this, and I'm grateful for it. And so tonight, what we're going to talk about is, why is it a big deal that Jesus was fully God? Why is that a big deal? Last week, why was it a big deal that Jesus was fully human? We hashed through that. Tonight, let's talk about why it's a big deal that Jesus is fully God. Okay, and what it means is that in the incarnation of Jesus being fully God, we essentially have somebody that can go into the presence of the Father and not be smitten dead, that can stand in the presence and the holiness of God and make propitiation or be an advocate or a liaison for the rest of humanity that is broken and fallen. In this place, the only people that stand are the sinless. If you have sin, you don't stand in the presence and holiness of God. So it's a big deal that Jesus is fully God, so that he can stand in the presence of God and make intercession for us. So it's a big deal. Let me illustrate it this way. Okay, I want you to take, for instance, that we are all in an incarceration camp. Okay. We are soldiers, and we have been taken prison behind enemy lines, and we are now in an incarceration camp of the enemy. And they've got us in this camp, and there's two big pieces of this camp. First of all, the only way to get out is to live a perfect, sinless life, to be perfect and sinless. In not only action but also motive. It's the only way out of the camp. Okay, you've got to live a life. If you live your life, ever how long that is, in perfect law or perfectly according to God's standards, then you get out. It's the only way out. And the enemy has locked us up in this camp, and it's the only way out. And so you live your life, you get out in action and in deed. Now, here's the other tricky part to this, is that when you are placed into the camp, there is an inclination in your heart, or you're given a desire to go away from the things of God and instead of into the things of God. This would be what David said, you're being born into iniquity. So you're being born into a process of going away from God. You're being born into an quote-unquote incarceration camp that has a spirit about it that is anti-God. It goes the other direction. And that's what we're born into. And so that's the incarceration camp. Got to live perfectly the law of God, and in your heart, you don't want to. Okay? That's what it's about. And so that's the only way out. And so when you get to your judgment time, what you have is the Father, or let's say the judge, an accuser, which is the enemy, Satan, and you, okay? And you stand in that courtroom at the end of your life, you stand in that courtroom, and then the accuser hits play on all of the surveillance footage they have of the incarceration camp. They catch every action of sin that you had and every motive of sin that you had. Not only do they have video cameras, but they also have a way of intuitively knowing what your motive was behind even the good action that you did. And they hit play. And you sit here thinking that you've maybe lived a pretty good life, did better than everybody else in the camp. Maybe he'll make an exception here. He hits play. You see just how wicked everything was. He knows how wicked everything was. The judge is standing knowing what the recompense is here. He knows that you've got to live it perfectly. Hits play. You haven't. Depart from me, worker of iniquity. You were in the camp. You did iniquity. You're gone. Okay? That is the scenario that we find ourselves in. Okay? That's the human race. Okay? So, how does God get people out of this incarceration camp? Well, he intervenes. Okay? He has to intervene. Because nobody else here is ever going to live it. No human's ever going to live it perfect. Now watch how this works. So God intervenes. So here comes the gospel story. How does he intervene? He's born of a virgin, a supernatural virgin birth, miraculous conception. He intervenes. Not born of man, but born of God. He intervenes. So he comes into the camp. He comes into the incarceration camp. And he lives 33 years in the incarceration camp. In motive and in deed, he lives it perfectly. Okay? He submits to the will of God perfectly. And because he submits to the will of God perfectly, he exposes the kingdom of God in the way that he does. This incarceration camp is so hostile to God and the ways of God that Jesus ends up getting killed. The hostility towards the things of God end him up on a cross. And it is there that we see that he takes on not his own sinfulness, but the sinfulness of the incarceration camp. Think about it. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. So he's taking on the iniquity or the sinfulness of the camp, not of his own. And so he allows, I lay my life down, is what he says. Nobody takes it from me, I lay it down. So he allows death to come, and the Father takes all of the punishment that is due the incarceration camp, and he puts it on Jesus on the cross. He pours out the wrath of sin on the cross on Jesus. And Jesus absorbs all of that penalty and punishment, and he never sinned. So he's got a little bit of street cred here, but yet he takes on the punishment that is due us, right? And so it's almost as if he invades the camp turns on him. He says, I love the camp so much, I'm going to take on the iniquity of this camp. And so now watch. So for 3 days, he dies, and then 3 days later, something happens. And so in that 3 days, something happens. And so the story doesn't end with the cross, it ends with the resurrection. What's the significance of that? So go back to the courtroom. The Father, the accuser, and Jesus. Jesus lived this life perfectly. The resurrection shows us that the Father accepted the offering that Jesus brought. So when the accuser says, hey, you can't do this ain't fair. And he says, no. He lived it perfectly. I accept that offering. And so when the Father accepts that offering, you have resurrection from the dead. You have the overcoming of the second death. He doesn't get cast into hell. He's resurrected. And then he is able to go back to the camp and say, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. Nobody comes to the Father but through me. And he just echoes that across the camp. The first scenario of that is Acts 2, when Peter breaks out of the upper room full of the Spirit of God, and he says, it's Jesus, the Son of God, that you crucified. It's his Spirit, it's his presence. That's what you're seeing. And 3,000 men get saved that day. and they put their hope and faith in Jesus so that when they stand in their judgment time, they can say, my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and his righteousness. And if his work wasn't enough for me, then my work definitely is not enough for me, and I fall in the mercy of Jesus Christ. And the Father says, I have accepted his offering. Enter into the joys of the Lord. So, Jesus being fully God is an unbelievably significant part about who Jesus is. So, I hope that was helpful. I hope that scenario helps. Yeah, just super grateful to Jesus and who he is. And so, as you enter into discussion tonight, I pray that we get a greater understanding of who Jesus is, and we see the incarnation much better. So, I love you. I'll see you Sunday. Hopefully, I do a little better Sunday. It was a great Sunday, but just an overwhelming Sunday as well. So, but looking forward to this Sunday. And man, if I don't see you before then, God bless you, and I'll see you soon. God bless.